This is a guided meditation to Anattā practice, to a kind of no-self practice, an investigation of the sense of self and where it could be found. Begin by taking a comfortable posture. It doesn't matter what kind of posture. You can sit on a chair or a cushion, lie down, whatever. And close your eyes. And we'll begin by settling down for a few minutes. You may use the breath as your method, your anchor, or for example something like shikantaza, just sitting, just being there with your body, perhaps bringing your attention slightly down from your thoughts to the body, to the senses, and just allow things to be. But whatever method you use, let's settle down for a few minutes in peace. Present with what is, in the fleeting present, at the crest of the present. Letting yourself drop into the present, into whatever object you're working with, or just, again, the body, the senses, the fleeting present. And I would invite you now to observe your body with your attention, with your internal gaze. Observe the body and ask yourself, does this body feel like it's me? Is this body me? You may use your name, whatever it is, and ask yourself, is this body your name? Is this whatever you are called? Is this the person? Is this the being? Is the body me? Does it feel like it is me? And it might feel that way, to some extent. Or it might not. And if it feels like me, like you, ask yourself, does this body feel like it is exhaustively me? Is this body what you are? Is this body what you are? Does it feel like this body is what you are? Explore the body and how it feels. If you notice a sense of self there, if you notice that something feels like, this is me, or just a part of me, then you may see or notice that is there a way in which you could see it as not quite so me. You may notice, for example, that there might be a feeling that you are observing the body, and that there is a kind of disconnect or a kind of distance between what feels perhaps more like you, a witnessing position perhaps, and the body. That even though the body might feel like it's a part of you, it might not feel like it's exhaustively you. There is something beyond that is perhaps observing the body. If you can notice this kind of distance, this kind of duality between the observed body and the observer, pay attention to that for a moment, this distance. This feeling that you are, perhaps, observing the body, and in observing the body, you may be able to detach to a degree from this identification with the body. And see if the sense that the body is more of a natural phenomenon, belonging to nature, much like anything else you would sense. Not perhaps belonging to you and not identical with you. See if you can wield this sense of distance between observer and observed to deconstruct to some extent the sense of self associated with the body, or reinforce the perhaps already present recognition that yes, this body is not me, or not exhaustively, at the very least, me, that there is something beyond. This body is an object. You are perceiving, observing. Not you, not me. This body is like any other phenomenon, a phenomenon, or conglomerate of phenomena. And if there's a sense of ownership lingering, that perhaps the body is not me, but it's mine, try to apply the view to it that, much like if you would open your eyes and gaze at the table or a wall or whatever else, or see a rainbow in the sky, this body too is a natural phenomenon. It does not belong to me, does not belong to you, it belongs to nature. And if there's any change in the sense of self or the sense of ownership, recognize this change. And recognize that if the sense of self, the sense of identification or ownership can change, it is not quite so intrinsically linked to the body as a phenomenon than one might ordinarily, perhaps, think. One might notice a certain pliancy, a malleability to the sense of self and ownership. And this makes it all the more subjective. If you recognize this distance and this disidentification, this change, this malleability, notice how it makes this identification quite essentially less real in an objective sense, more mind-dependent, dependent on how the mind perceives the body, as self or as not self. And that if this identification is mind-dependent, it's there only if the mind sees it to be there. It's not, in a sense, very real or robust. And finally, perceive the body again, keep perceiving it, observing it, and ask yourself again, does this body feel like me? Honestly, sincerely. If it does, that's fine. If it doesn't, note this. This body does not actually feel, perhaps, like me. These are not absolute views. We are playing with a way of perceiving that might be useful, skillful, and freeing. So do not get too hung up on the truth aspect of it. Simply see if you can perceive the body as not self, not me, and not mine, belonging to nature. And recognize that if this changes how it feels, if it deconstructs the identification is subjective and malleable. Then observe, please, your mind, your thinking mind, your discursive mind, the flow of words, thoughts, images, and just symbolic meaning that feels like it's located perhaps somewhere within the cranium, within the head, behind the head, around the head. Something we easily identify with, perhaps even more so than with the body. And observing the mind, its dance, its flicker, those clouds forming in the sky and dissipating, moving perhaps rapidly, perhaps languidly, slowly. Ask yourself, Does this mind feel like me? Is this mind me? Is this the locus, the focal point, the origin of myself, of you? Again, it may feel like it's a part of you, perhaps. But is it exhaustively you? Is it the focal point of you, the feeling of self? Is this mind you? You may notice that thoughts, wherever they feel like they're appear out of nowhere and dissipate into nowhere, into nothingness. Some of the thoughts might feel like you are creating them, but there are others, as you observe your mind, that seem to perhaps arise spontaneously, just on their own. You may note this feeling of personal responsibility that comes with some of the thoughts, this feeling of identification and ownership. Pay attention to that subtle difference between the spontaneous thoughts and the ones you feel like you are creating. Try for a moment to notice the feeling of identification with some of the thoughts. That difference, that subtle difference between thoughts you identify with and thoughts you don't. And notice that even though some of the thoughts might have this sense of personal responsibility attached to them, regardless of whether it's present or not, all the thoughts, the images, whatever, they arise out of nothing and they dissipate into nothing. Notice that the difference is actually quite subtle. It's more of a difference in tone, in flavor, like a label of self, or responsibility, of agency, has been slapped onto some of the thoughts, and not onto some others. And notice that despite whether it is there or not, the sense of self, you are observing the thoughts, the mind. And again, pay attention to this sense of distance between the observer, the witness, and the observed thoughts, the mind. Can the mind be you if you are looking at it? Like the body, the mind is phenomenal. It appears in the flow of becoming, observed, witnessed, conscious, but an object perceived, an object observed. Can any object like that, even the mind, be you if you are looking at it? Notice this sense of distance and see if there's some way you can perceive thought and thinking and mind as not self, not you. And even if you can relinquish some of that sense of ownership, that this is my mind, my thoughts, And as with the body, perceive it instead as a natural phenomenon, like a rainbow, a shimmer, or like clouds forming again in the sky, in the open sky. Doesn't belong to me, belongs to nature. Just see if you can play with this way of seeing, this way of looking. And again, be sensitive to any change, any malleability in that perception of self and ownership. Recognizing that if there's a change, if there is a disidentification to some degree, that this too means that that sense of self and ownership is mind dependent. It's there if the mind perceives it to be there, but not there if the mind does not perceive it to be there. It's subjective. And thereby not quite really objectively there. It's not intrinsically linked to the mind, like it's not intrinsically linked to the body. And again ask yourself, does this mind and this thought arising in the mind, with its very ambiguous location perhaps, rising out of nothing, dissipating into nothing, is this mind me? Does it feel like me? Does it feel like I am the mind? Does it feel like I own the mind? Sincerely ask. And if it does feel like you, that's fine. This is about perception, ways of looking. And if it does still feel like self, like me, like you, see if you can just wield a perception that, again, focusing on the distance between observer and observed, see if you can tap into a sense that perhaps it's not quite so you, after all. So at this point you may gaze again internally at your body and then again at your mind, at these phenomena, these appearances. And notice that in both cases there might be a sense of distance between observer and observed, and that this may result in a kind of disidentification with these phenomena. Then you may ask yourself, if the self is neither the body nor the mind, where is the self? And a very natural place that most minds pinpoint at this moment, asking this question, where am I? Where are you? Where is the self? The mind stream points to the witness, the observer. The observer is the self. The witness is the self. You may feel as if your mind were kind of gesturing, perhaps behind the head, behind the body somewhere, or even on a point inside the head, somewhere where it feels like there's the witness. But then ask yourself, can you actually perceive a witness, an observer, anywhere? Can the camera film itself? Ask yourself perhaps a few times, where am I? Where is the self? Where is the witness? Where is the observer? And notice the ways in which your mind might be gesturing. It's there, it's beyond, it's behind, perhaps. Somewhere beyond phenomena. And pay attention to how this gesturing feels like. What feelings or conceptualizations, but often they are actually somatically felt bodily feelings, subtle perhaps, and dissipating very quickly. But what are the feelings, the sensations? What does the gesturing, somewhere beyond, somewhere behind perhaps, what does it consist of? Try to notice those subtle, fleeting feelings, arising perhaps somewhere in the back of the head, or in the neck, or in the upper back, perhaps. Those subtle feelings that seem to point behind, beyond. It's there. It's in that direction, somewhere there. If you notice these feelings, ask yourself if you can capture even a glimpse of them. Do those sensations that seem to point to the self, the witness, are they the witness? Do they feel like self? Do they feel like you are those sensations, those gesturings towards a potential witness? Are those sensations the witness? Whatever it is in your experience that creates the feeling or manifests the feeling that, the witness is the self and the witness is over there, behind. Are any of those the witness or the self? Do they feel like the witness or the self? And you may notice and recognize that these sensations are still phenomena. They are something you feel like you are observing. They are not quite the observer because they are still phenomena. They might feel like protrusions or appendages of the witness, somehow protruding from it. But they are not the witness. Feel the sense of distance again between the observer and these observed sensations that seem to point out the existence of a witness, an observer. Spend a moment observing these sensations and the sense of distance, questioning, do these feel like self? Do these feel like the witness? Are these me? And you may recognize that Beyond these phenomena, there is no indication of a witness anywhere to be found. The witness itself is unfindable. You may recognize that the camera indeed does not film itself. So is there actually any indication that there is a camera, other than these fleeting phenomena that seem to point somehow to it? Isn't there something a little bit suspicious about that? You may question this. Is there a witness? Is there an observer at all? Is it possible to view your experience in a way that actually does away with the sense of an observer? Perhaps it's just consciousness, just spread out. Is it even possible to perhaps disentangle from the feeling that there's a point of view? That there is a place from which things are experienced or observed. Perhaps they just are as they are. And you may also pay attention to the question, even if there were a witness, just a camera without any content, observing everything, but not itself feeling things, not itself the mind, the body, something beyond, just a lens, an empty lens, just perceiving, observing. Would that be an adequate self either, even if it were there? Do you feel like you are just a contentless I? I as in self, I as in just an I, a perceiving I, a camera lens. Do you feel like you are a contentless observer? Is that adequate, without any intrinsic connection to the mind or the body? No agency in thinking or moving the body or bodily functions and feeling? Just a lens. Is that an adequate self? And it might feel like, yes, it is an adequate self, and that's fine. But you might also play with this. Is it possible to disidentify a little bit from this idea? To kind of play with the way of seeing that it would not be an adequate self. Would it really be an adequate self? And you may here too see a kind of malleability. It might change. There might be a disidentification. And now bring your attention again to the conglomerate. Body, mind, witness. If it is there, if it's not there. See that, if none of these parts, you might feel, for example, that perhaps the self is none of these parts, but it's their totality, their combination. It might feel like that. It's, I am not the body, not the mind, not the witness, but the coming together of them. That is me. But then ask yourself, does the self feel like something that could be made out of parts that are in themselves completely not self? Does that make any sense? That the self would somehow be the coming together of non-self, not self, parts. You may play with this too for a moment. This question, is that an adequate self? a conglomerate of parts, completely not self. And you might feel again a kind of disidentification, a malleability, that perhaps it does not make as much sense as before. And there might be a kind of breaking apart of that feeling, that the totality would be a self. And again, recognize the malleability, the changeability, the mind dependence of the perception of self in this totality of phenomena and witness, observer and observed coming together. So again, does the body feel like you? Does the mind feel like you? Is there a witness to be seen anywhere? Is there any actual indication of a witness other than these fleeting, fabricated phenomena that seem to point to something? And what that something would even be? What is a witness? What do we mean by it? And even if there is a witness, would that be an adequate self? Just as this lens, this empty, contentless lens, does that feel like you? Like you would be that kind of thing? And the coming together of these elements, does that feel like me? Would that be an adequate self? The coming together of no self components. You might feel like there's a disidentification with all of these. And then you can ask yourself, if it's none of these, where would the self be? What else could it be? What else could it be, and where could it be? And sometimes it can happen that the mind then points to something somewhere else, Okay, that maybe if it's not the witness, behind the head, for example, or behind the upper back, maybe it's somewhere behind the lower back, in that kind of last, if the body and mind make up two quadrants of our kind of phenomenal space, and the witness would be like a postulated third quadrant. Maybe it's the fourth quadrant below the behind the lower back. But these two, these indications, the same thing as with the witness, they're just fleeting phenomena, felt in the body, perhaps conceptually in the mind. And they are perceived, observed phenomena. They too hardly feel like adequate selves. So it can feel like there is no space for the self to be anywhere. Nothing feels like self, like an adequate self at this point, perhaps. And if it does, that's fine. These are perspectives to play with. And you may try again if you wish at some other point in the future. But you might have hit upon the perception that nothing feels like self. And finally you may ask yourself, what does the concept of a self even mean? What do we mean when we speak of a self? What is it? What could it be? Where could it be? What could it be? The whole concept of selfhood might strike you as more empty than before, perhaps. One might say that the self is the person, but this is a tautology. It's the same thing. They're synonyms, basically. Might be to feel like the self is the essence of the person, but where is the essence to be found, and what is an essence to begin with? Again, somewhat of a synonym. The whole concept might lose some of its edge. And here I will leave you to perhaps explore any of these fields, body, mind, witness, any of these ideas. Where is the witness? Is it to be found? Does it exist? Is it adequate even if it does? Is the totality adequate for a self? Explore this for as long as you wish. and see and recognize that whatever disentanglement, whatever disidentification, malleability might present itself, this points to mind dependence, subjectivity, that these perceptions of self are indeed just perceptions. And if there's any sense of lightening, relaxation, freedom, joy arising from this, please enjoy. And I thank you for your attention, for your practice wholeheartedly. May you be a boon to yourself and to this world. May your practice deepen, and may you, my friend, may you be happy, also ever, ever so happy. Peace, bless you.